Hey, thanks again for joining us for another episode of Triple Play. And as always,
like and subscribe, share, comment.
We love comments. And in fact, get your questions in for Andy Van Slyke and Josh Beckett. We're going to be having lots of ongoing discussions with those guys. And I know everybody has baseball questions. What are the Cardinals going to do? What are the Dodgers going to do? Are they buyers? Are they sellers?
But more than that, if you have other questions, Beckett likes fishing. He's an outdoorsman. If you have questions about equipment he uses, my dad likes working out, taking care of himself, things like that. So if you have health questions, there's other things that they do other than just sports.
I think it's funny because almost every guy at the gym knows your dad from the commercials from his jacked
Nugenics,
yeah. They always like, dude, that guy.
I may start picking his brain.
He knows how to eat well and work out well.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
It shows. I may start picking his brain.
All right. Well, don't forget to support those that support us. And that means giving our man Andy McCollum with Resource One a call at 636-458-1798. And Chris and the team at CS Design a call at 573-436-3717. So,
who we got today?
Man, today we've got Doug Hayward. Doug Hayward is a friend, a mentor.
It's a face meant to be on TV.
And we got to know each other really over the last couple years. We were serving together at church, and the more I got around Doug, the more I started hearing his life story, and I thought, man, this guy's lived a little bit. This is some good stuff.
Look at me.
So, yeah.
Those are hard-earned whites.
Yeah.
I tell people the Lord's been hard on me, but go ahead.
That's awesome. So it really is a joy to have you here today. And so let's just kind of start at the beginning. Where did the St. Louis question? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? And give us a little bit about your background. You were sharing just a few minutes ago about your dad.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that and walk us through that and also a little bit of your testimony. So
yeah, it helped shape me, so it's good to know. I grew up in Ladue and went to Ladue High School. My dad was a radio TV guy. He did, back in the late 50s, early 60s, he did the news, he did weather. And back then, one guy could do the weather on one station and drive to the next station and do the news. Same guy. And my dad did that. So he was... in that era, he was really well known. But what people didn't know is, and this is pretty common in the industry, is my dad was an alcoholic. He was a functioning alcoholic. He could give a newscast drunk, and people wouldn't know. But unfortunately, the people that were his employers did know. And so eventually he would lose a job and then lose another job because he wasn't getting a handle on that. So that was played out at our home. My dad was not a violent drinking man. He was quiet, but he was also not involved emotionally in my life and the life of my other two sisters. So that affects you. It kind of leaves a hole. And I see it as providential. The Lord really used that in my life to create this vacuum of what else is there. And I think he used that to draw me to the cross. Mm-hmm. So I don't downplay that. I see it as, obviously God is sovereign, but I see that as an active role that my dad's alcoholism played in my salvation. So I grew up in Ladue, went to Ladue High School. Because my dad would lose jobs, I drove old beat-up cars while my friends were driving. My neighbor drove a powder blue Jaguar XKE, and I had a 67 Plymouth station wagon. It had a hole that was rusted through on the floor. So, I was in that environment, but felt very much not a part of that environment at Ladue High School. I always felt like an outcast a little bit. But I had lots of friends. A lot of my friends were Jewish. Most of my friends were Jewish. And that plays a part in my testimony. Is that, you want more information than that?
No, that's good.
Did you use the hole as a trash bin? You don't have to answer that.
Well, you know what else about that car? And I took actually dated a girl, and on the way to her house to pick her up, our windshield wipers didn't work. I literally had my sleeve pulled up like this with a squeegee in my hand, driving like this with my hand outside the window. You can imagine, I'm going to Ladue High School doing this, so I felt.
They didn't have Rain-X back
I'm
then.
embarrassed just to talk about it. What's that?
I said they didn't have Rain-X back then.
No, it wouldn't have helped. But anyway, yeah. So that's another.
Did you stay in St. Louis after high school?
Yeah, my parents hung on, literally hung on until I finished Ladue High School.
Okay.
They didn't have the money to. They wanted me to complete Ladue High School, so
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I was the youngest of 5.
Wow.
Yeah, Brian, Greg, Pam, Cheryl, me, and I have a sister who also is handicapped. Was referred to as educably retarded, and is currently, sadly, in a home for people that have dementia. She's just 13 months older than I am, but you would think she was 20 years older. So, yeah, that's been kind of sad. But, yeah, 2 brothers, 2 sisters. Scott, yep.
And so did you go to college?
I went to School of the Ozarks. You ever heard of it?
Yeah.
Branson? Yeah.
Good school.
It's for people that have financial issues. They pay for everything as long as you work 20 hours a week and then during the summer work 3 40-hour weeks. So you actually pay for your college education by going there. And I went there for a year, and it was there that wasn't the first time I heard the gospel, but it was a teacher there. Do you want me to go into this part? Is that okay?
Yeah.
It was
you can go wherever you want.
Okay.
I'm enjoying this.
It was a teacher there. His name was Dwayne Oliver. I'll never forget him. Sociologist, had no interest in sociology, just loved the man. And I so loved his class that I was willing to follow him if he left the school. And sure enough, he got offered the head of the sociology department at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I was going to follow him, even though my love was math. I was going to pursue math. But he made an offer in his classroom. He said, look, I became a Christian 3 years ago. If there's anybody in this room that would like to talk to me about that, you're welcome to come to my office. And I was the only one that took him up on it because the Lord was really working in my heart. And I went and talked to him, and he drew me a little diagram of when he became a Christian and how it changed his life. And so that planted a seed. Prior to that, on the way to a wrestling meet, I wrestled in high school at Ladue, and one of my wrestling teammates was a guy named Tad Edwards. Actually, he's got a company now called Benjamin F. Edwards IV. You've heard of A.G. Edwards, right? That was his dad, and that sold, I think, I forget who bought that.
Is Tad the short one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just saw him at a funeral.
I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was there.
I saw you there.
Zach Faye's dad,
Yeah.
Charlie. Yeah. Tad spoke. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tad was the first one on the way to a wrestling match to share his Christian faith with me. And Tad was quite the mischievous guy, and I saw a change in him, and I didn't know what happened, and he explained to me what happened. So I was able to go to Tad 5 years later and tell him I had become a Christian, and we've remained close friends ever since. We don't get to see each other as often. We're currently on the 50th graduation ceremony meeting, is that right, for Ladue High School. It's 1973. So our 50th high school graduation year is this year. And Ted and I are on that same committee together. So I've been able to reconnect a little bit.
That's cool.
Yeah, we've tried to stay connected through a lunch or whatever, and our connection is Christ. So, I mean, he's taken a completely different path. Very successful businessman, and I was putting mail in a box for 40 years.
So how did you become a mailman?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I went to School of the Ozarks, stayed there for a year, had every intention of following the sociology teacher I just told you about. And in order to do that, I was going to have to, my parents didn't have any money. I was going to have to pay for it. So I thought, okay, I'll quit school for the summer. I'll go to work, try to get some money saved. And it was that interim period when I told you I had a lot of Jewish friends, and the Lord used that in my life in this way. One of the guys I worked with was a Hebrew Christian, a Messianic Jew, and I had never heard of that. I didn't know what that was. All I knew is that my Jewish friends identified themselves as those who don't believe in Jesus. That was how they identified that. It didn't matter if they were religious Jews or not. They did not believe in Jesus. So when this guy, and I worked with him, again, at Barnes Hospital to make money so I could follow this sociology teacher, this guy started talking to me about Christ, and we spent a month and a half talking about the Bible, and he had whole chapters memorized. He wore polka dot pants with striped shirts. I thought he was humble. He was just an awful dresser, and he also had some mental issues. I only add that in because it's the power of the gospel that changes people, not the power of the person. And he was so good at sharing Christ. I mean, he quoted to me Isaiah 53, which is written 700 years before Christ, shared with me that and said, look, this is what I didn't know any of that. And I was then, that's when I started thinking, maybe the Bible's true. And then he gave me the gospel over and over and over. And sometime during that period, I asked Christ to take over my life. Not sure when. May I tell a little bit about that? Just
please. Yeah, you can. You don't have to ask. Just do. Just jump in.
His explanation of the word repentance, probably not adequate. It didn't matter. The Lord had his hooks in me. He just said it's a change of mind, a simple change of mind. And it was almost, the implied was almost, you don't have to change at all. There's no change. But what happened to me was, and this is what I believe the word repentance in essence means, is I transferred my allegiance from a desire to live for myself to Christ. I stopped rebelling against God by ignoring him. So the essence of repentance in my mind is you're turning from your rebellion toward God and turning to him. And that manifests itself, at least it did for me, in what I was doing, which was being immoral. I was sleeping with my girlfriend, and I knew that was wrong. Nobody said, hey, you got to stop this. I just knew that was wrong. And so when I actually became a Christian, I went to her and I said, I can't do this anymore. And we broke up. And then she didn't know what was going on with me. And, later came to the Barnes Hospital area where I was working and put a note on my door and said, what happened? And so she started coming to an outreach meeting with me, called Kibbutz, which was run by a guy here in town, who eventually became my pastor, which is a whole nother story. But, and it was an outreach to Hebrew Christian outreach. There were a lot of Jewish believers there. So, again, Ladue High School, all my buddies, I'm like, what? This is crazy. And she came to that, made a profession of faith. And that's what prompted me to start pursuing her as a wife, and which I did. And that leads us into a whole nother aspect of my life.
Well, that's okay. Let's go into that aspect. Yeah. So you pursue her, you get married, and then what happens?
Yeah.
Your kids?
Yeah, we had a lot of kids. We had 5 kids in 8 years, 4 boys and a little girl, who even today is kind of the light of my life. I love her dearly. The whole cleaving, that was the hardest. No, you gotta leave me alone. Stop bothering me. You gotta go to your husband. I love her dearly. She's a light bulb. I think you know her. Yeah. And Scott, love Scott, her husband. Anyway.
We all like them.
Yeah.
They're a blessing.
They are a blessing. Yeah. And they have them at our church now where they weren't before, and having those grandkids, Papa, run up and grab my leg. Oh, man.
Makes your life, doesn't it?
Oh, my goodness. It's so exciting. Yeah. Now to have my other stepson coming with his 2 kids, Yeah, it's a blessing. So where were we? Josh, help me out.
So you're getting married. You got 5 kids.
Yeah, we have 5 kids, and you have 4, right? You've got 6. Life can become very mundane, very routine. It's not all romance. It's a lot of work and a lot of repetition, a lot of changing diapers, a lot of mundane, get up, go to work, come home, take care of kids, blah, blah, blah. And if you don't have 2 people who understand the value of that scripturally, you begin to minimize how important those little mundane things are. And kind of that's where we went. But my wife's, how can I say this? I'll just say, she found somebody she liked better, a little more romantic. And I also want to quickly add, and this is part of what I would say to anybody who's going through a divorce. Once you've gone through a divorce, that you have to take time to reflect and say, what part did I play in that? And so I definitely played a part in that. I had sin patterns that I brought into my marriage. You can only imagine, from an alcoholic home. My now ex-wife had sin patterns she brought into the marriage. You can only imagine. Her father also was an alcoholic. She saw lots of really hard things in her home. And so you bring those 2 people together without having mentors help you think through those things, and it's just a disaster waiting to happen, which is what it was. So my sin pattern was, if I got mad, I shut down.
Yeah. I want to stop there for just a second, because I actually, when I'm talking to young men, that's one of the key things we often talk about is it seems like when people come together, and in today's age, they come together later in life. And so what that really means is they've actually got more luggage that they're bringing into the marriage. The longer you wait, the more, in today's world, back biblical times, they were getting married 15, 16, 17. It was young, right? And then today, the average marriage age is like 30-ish. And so we're when I was growing up, it was like in the late teens, early 20s, where it was normal. 19 to like 24 was like a normal marriage. That's not today. Today it's late 20s, early 30s, putting off kids longer now, right? Because they want to be successful, and all of those things. When you just sit back from in what you were saying, are just added luggage that take away from the value of marriage, in my opinion. And also, they all have to be worked through. I mean, you've got to, if you don't stop and address those up front, it just gets worse and worse the longer you ignore it, and then it blows up, and it's no wonder that divorce is so rampant, whether it be in the church or out of the church. It's everywhere right now.
Well, especially if you don't have any kind of mentors, you're perfecting your fleshly sin patterns the longer you're not married, because marriage is one of the greatest sanctifiers. You realize, whoa, I'm married to a sinner, and that person says, whoa, I'm married to a sinner, and you realize it, and boy, it's this, unless somebody's able to speak into your life, which is one of the reasons Lynn and I currently speak into the lives of younger couples. We love the book, What Did You Expect? By Paul Tripp.
Awesome book.
It's an awesome book, and it's been good for us too. It's Scott, if you've never read it, it's an awesome book.
I've read some of Paul Tripp's stuff, but I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, this is in fact, somebody just said to me today, any chance you guys could do this for a number of couples in our church rather than just one-on-one? And so Lynn and I are thinking that through as of today. And I think that would be a wonderful thing. We'll see. Both pretty busy, but I'd love to be able to do that. Anyway, I didn't have that, and neither did my now ex-wife. And so, it was just kind of a time bomb. And she met a guy that kind of swept her off her feet, and I couldn't possibly compete with that. I was, trying to stay home, hold the fort down, go to work, put mail in a box, come home, take care of 5 kids, change diapers, and I could not compete with that kind of romantic thing. And it was a fantasy. And I will say to people who are in that right now, perhaps, I don't know you, but maybe there are people listening who are entertaining that kind of fantasy. I can tell you it is a fantasy, and it will explode eventually, because no matter who the person is you're thinking might be better than the one you're leaving, they're a sinner. And you're going to find that out, and you're going to go, oh my goodness, I've just swapped problems. I haven't solved anything.
Well, and if they're willing to take somebody who should be committed to another relationship, what does that tell them about their view of commitment?
Right.
The other thing I often find is, especially as men, we find that, men who want to have a younger version of a female, they want the young body again. And I go, well, what's going to happen when you're old? They're going to leave you.
Yeah.
They're going to want the younger man, right? I mean, it just flip the table and then tell me, how does this play out long term? And do you want to be 80 years old sitting on your bedside by yourself? I mean, go look at people who are happily married and together in their old age, and then go look at people who are single in their old age, and tell me which one you want.
That's right. That's so true.
Because you're going to spend a big chunk of your life in your older age, right? I mean, over 60.
Yep. And if you would stop in your tracks and say, okay, maybe what that guy's saying is true. This is a fantasy I'm chasing. It's really hard to get people to do that because emotions are powerful. Really, really hard. But that's what happened. And I came to realize I had lost her. There was no convincing her that this wasn't going to be a better solution. So there I was, and we had a very unusual arrangement in our divorce settlement. I know of no one, perhaps you guys know of people that have one like this. I know of no one that has an arrangement like we had. Now, our kids are grown, so not an issue. The only one we have to deal with now is my handicapped son, because we do still co-parent him. But the arrangement was joint physical, joint legal, joint everything, with no guidelines. Do you know of anybody that has that?
I don't know specifics of many divorces, but that sounds.
I've never heard of anybody that got that.
Well, I look at divorce degrees all the time for my business, and I've never seen that.
Never. And the only reason we did that is because I realized, 2 years prior to that time we sat down across the table from each other to finalize our divorce. I realized I have to think about the kids, what's best for these kids. And I'm grateful to my ex-wife for doing the same thing. Because one thing she also did was she allowed me to take my kids to church every single Sunday. She didn't fight me on that. And because they were in our church, New Community Church, that was huge in their spiritual development. I can't overstate that. It was huge, and so I'm always been grateful that she allowed that. She just so in fact, just the other day on the way out here to meet somebody, I thought of our founding pastor Jerry Marshall, and I called him just because I was thinking about how grateful I was. I couldn't talk. He's like, "You there?" Yeah, I'm sorry, Jerry. Give me a minute. He said, What's going on? I just want to tell you how much. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you how much I appreciate how you poured into my life. Because I crawled into that church. 5 kids, broken man. 1989, second week that it started. I went by myself to check it out. Sold on Jerry, sold on his preaching, and said, this is where I want to park my family, because I had gone through a pretty bad church experience. And been there ever since, So Jerry was hugely instrumental in helping me heal in so many ways, and hugely instrumental in my kid's life. I have a son who's now a pastor down in Austin, Texas, and
great first name.
Josh, exactly right. And the beauty of our relationship, we talk almost every day. Now it's peer to peer. As an elder of the church, he values my advice. I value his advice. It's just awesome. That wouldn't have happened apart from New Community Church and Jerry Marshall. The Lord used him and the church in so many wonderful ways. So I crawled into that church.
And Jerry's one of the most humble men I've ever met.
Yes, he is.
I mean, I say that without.
Look at the transition. Jerry now has given his legacy over to a younger man, and he's doing exactly what we all knew he would do. He was pointing to that guy saying, he must increase and I must decrease. That's what he's doing, and it's exactly what we knew he would do.
So you're trying to give a preview for next week's episode where he comes in and talks about biblical transition of authority in the church?
Well, I'll say it has to start with very humble men. It won't work because most churches won't do it the way we did it.
No.
We were advised by all the experts, don't let your senior pastor stay there. And we're like, wait, we know him. Well, you don't really. No, we do, really. He'll be fine. As long as the guy we're turning it over to is faithful to the word of God, he'll be fine. And we were right because we knew him.
Yeah.
And he has only proven over and over what we knew about him. He would humbly step aside, and that is not easy.
Well, and the guy that you chose is a humble man.
Right. And you see that in the pulpit all the time. They exalt each other from the pulpit. And it's so assuring to all of us who were raised under Jerry and the new people who are like, who's this guy? Who's this Jerry guy? It's right now, a lot of people don't even know who he is.
Right.
And they see these compliments coming from the pulpit about each other, and it just settles hearts. It's exactly what I expected.
Wow.
And yeah.
Anyways, a little preview for next week's episode when Jerry's in here. So
yeah, and he's the guy that can talk about transitions, but he's also a guy that may not say it takes a humble senior pastor. So I'll say it. It takes that in order for this to work.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I said he's such a humble man.
Yeah.
One of the first things I identified with him when we first started going and watching him preach was just his humility.
Yeah.
It was very, very, very evident.
Open, transparent, honest. Yeah.
By the door, shaking everybody's hand, open for any discussion people have. And the way he responded was always gentle and loving. Our first lunch, I mean, I can go on and on. Just really, that's why we started going there. I fell in love with the man. Yeah. So his preaching was good. My kids were growing spiritually. So
yeah. And he's got a great testimony too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine him with hair down the middle of his back?
Him and his wife.
Yeah.
It's similar.
Yeah.
Similar testimonies. Yeah.
Cindy too.
Yeah, he shared it on a previous episode we had.
She tell you she was a go-go dancer? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just great. Cindy Marshall, come on. That's crazy. But that's the Lord.
Yeah.
That's what the Lord does in people's lives. That's certainly what he did in mine. So, yeah.
So, all right. So now you're divorced. You've crawled into a new community.
Yeah.
And you've given some advice to these people who might be going through something like this, which, that's why we're doing this. We not only just to talk about the Lord, but hopefully as people listen on these episodes, they can identify with some of this stuff. And I think you rightfully said there may be people listening in on here who maybe have thought about things like that. So as a divorcee, what would you say the very first thing that's most important to, divorces happen.
Yeah.
There's no fixing it, at least at this point.
Yep.
What are the steps that you would tell a young, or not even a young man, but a man or a woman who's gone through that?
Can we back up? Sorry.
Yeah, that's
back up one question prior.
Yep.
Yeah.
The thought of maybe there is somebody driving that has that fancy now. What advice would you have for them to prevent that?
That it has that fantasy is listen to what I'm telling you. I have life experience. I've seen it over and over and over, not just in my life, but in the lives of people I've counseled. If you think this person you're going to is going to fulfill all your wonderful romantic needs, it's a fantasy. You will find out shortly after you were married that if that's where you're headed, that is not true. You will find that out, and you will find out this person is as much a selfish person as the one I left. All I have done is compounded my life with more problems.
And so would your advice be maybe it's as simple as that man going to his wife and saying, I've had these thoughts. We need to talk about this.
Yeah, I would go to other men first.
Okay.
Yeah, and perhaps, we have, it's a great question, Scott.
And the only reason I asked is maybe the question if posed to you is if your wife back then, instead of doing what she did, came to you and said, "I've been having these thoughts," I would imagine now, future forward, you would say, "I would have responded well to that. I would have appreciated that."
I hope so. I was a young man.
Yeah.
I might have just blown up and said, "Get out."
Sure.
I didn't have the maturity I have now. I hope I have some maturity. I hope I've learned some stuff about life. But yeah, I would recommend if there's somebody listening to me that has those thoughts, they go to another trusted man or woman and say, "This is, if it's a woman, if it's a man, it's a man. This is what I've been thinking. Would you help me think through this? And should I go to my wife about this or not?" I'm of the opinion that transparency will only build trust over time. So eventually that's going to have to be said, but it needs to be said with great wisdom. I'll give you an example. All right. Years ago, I had a young man tell me, and he'd been married quite some time, tell me that, he had a pornography addiction. And what should I do? Should I tell my wife? He was very, very convicted about it. This was a huge step for him to come forward and say something. And what we did was we sat down, if I remember right, with my wife, his wife, him and I, so that he could tell her and we could reinforce to her repentance and a desire for help to give her hope in that moment. And I'm happy to say years later, they are doing fantastic. But I think there needs to be a lot of wisdom. You don't just go dump the truck.
Yeah. There's no carte blanche. This is what you need to do.
Yeah, I think you just have to be very careful. So every guy at some point in his marriage probably thinks, "Man, if I had only married this person," maybe, I don't know. I never did, but I'm sure some do. It's a fantasy, and if I can just drive that point home, it is a fantasy. And once you develop that fantasy, and if you actually go for it and you've got somebody else on the string, it's so hard to break that because they're living this clandestine life of meetups that have nothing to do with the reality of life. That comes later, and then the regret comes, and then the realization that I've just added more problems to my life. So I would say if a guy is really convicted by that, he should eventually tell his wife. I think transparency is important, but not without having first gone to a godly man who can help walk him through it. And they can meet together with that wife or husband to say, "I think he's genuinely repentant about this, and we're here to walk alongside you to help you work through that." So, yeah. That's a great question.
Okay. Well, then your question: what precedes?
Yeah. Oh, any advice to people who are
in your situation? Your spouse left you.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't do anything really. I mean, everybody has fault in a divorce. There's no such thing as no fault divorce, right? So, but that being said, maybe you wanted to hold on to the marriage or whatnot, but it happened, and now you are where you're at. And what would you advise? What would you tell them to start with? I mean, obviously, if you got kids, there's stuff there.
Right. That's a great question, and I have an answer that's right at the top of the list, very top, and the rest are distant seconds.
Okay.
Is if you're that guy whose wife just told you, "I'm leaving you," or you're that woman whose husband just told you, "I'm out, I found somebody better," you must stay in your church. And I'm assuming you're in a good Bible-believing, Bible-teaching church where you're surrounded by others. I can't tell you how important it was that my kids were there at New Community week after week after week after week. Now, they got there and they didn't look so good. I mean, you can ask my daughter Janie about this. Sometimes she looked, the ladies would just shake their head and say, Janie, come with me to the bathroom so I can fix your hair. Because, that's not acceptable.
Take the girls to church without Audrey's hair help. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all right. And it's a lot of work. I also did. When people come to me and say, I'm late to work, I have 3 kids, I look at them and saying, you are crying on the wrong shoulder. I had 5 and I was a single dad. If I can get them to church 35 minutes away every single Sunday on time, you can too. You got to be a little bit unorthodox. I mean, Saturday nights, those kids were bathed, ready to go, and sometimes I dressed them in the clothes they were going to wear the next day. They got in bed in those clothes. Because it was so easy.
That's smart.
I know. I'm kind of. Should I be ashamed about that?
No.
I don't know. It worked, and I did whatever I had to do. But get those kids in church. Keep them in church. You need to be in church. You need to have the Word of God penetrating your heart, because those moments, especially early on, are so ripe for bitterness just taking over your life. If you're not in church and you're not hearing from other people about how to root out those bitter feelings and thoughts, you'll tank. And so being in church is super, super important. If you can. As I said, I was grateful to my ex-wife for her allowing me to do that. I was really grateful because it made a huge impact. We have people in our church right now going through divorces, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen for them. And they're going to have to just deal with their kids being in church every other week, which is really hard. But I had that, and I was grateful. So get your children in church, and then also husband, wife, get around others who will hold you accountable. We've talked about this, Josh, many times. Because I was involved in college and career, I really knew how hard it was for young men, particularly who were unmarried, to be pure, sexually pure. And now I was that guy. I had experienced 12 to 13 years where I wasn't denying myself, and now I have to. I knew that I had to, and it's a whole different ballgame. So I had guys.
That's one of the reasons why I tell people don't start, because once you start, it's a lot harder to stop.
Yep.
Well,
You mean being sexually active?
Yep.
Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Once you turn that faucet on, it's a lot harder to turn it off.
And the other thing too, that's a real temptation, especially for people that were in my shoes, where you've been rejected by your mate, and that's really hard to take. You're told, I know you better than anybody else, and I reject you fully. That's really hard to take. And so your natural fleshly tendency is what? I'll show you. There's others out there that think I'm pretty good. And you go into a relationship that's awful. I heard that so many times. Don't do that. Resist that. Don't do it, because you're trying to satisfy something that's been hurt in you in a sinful way, and it only ends poorly. Only ends poorly. So I was a single dad for a long time. Who wants a guy with 5 kids, And then I met Lynn.
Somebody did.
And then I met Lynn. I thought, oh, good, she's crazy. She wasn't afraid of my 5, but I was afraid of her 3. That took a long time, though. I mean, I didn't date. I did date about a year and a half after I got a divorce, too soon, way too soon. That didn't work out. And then I didn't date Lynn for another 3 years after that. So I was a single dad for a pretty long time.
And going to meet Lynn, yeah.
Yeah. It's a great story, Scott.
Well,
yeah. Well, I probably won't be able to tell it all, but
you have an
sit down over dinner sometime.
I'll hear the long. You have a short story now.
Well, you'll hear Lynn's story, and in that meeting anyway. I'll try to give it to you. Sorry about that. All right. So one of the things I did when we were divorced is I got involved. This is going to sound like an oxymoron, but my Christian divorce lawyer, is a guy that we still utilize in our church for some legal advice on occasion. He's an elder, was at Twin Oaks, and only help people, Christians primarily, who were divorced biblically, whether the unbelieving spouse left or there was adultery. And so he was my divorce lawyer. He was Lynn's divorce lawyer, unbeknownst to us. He puts her in a small group in an organization called Fresh Start, which I was a part of. Do you know John Callan? John? Do you know John? You know John. John Callan, John and Carol. They were left for a long time. He was actually an elder at our church for 20 years, but had to leave because his wife had health issues. They're now back and serving faithfully. But
I think I know who they are.
Yeah.
Yes.
So John Callan was a part of that organization. We became fast friends once I heard his story. And I joined that organization, Fresh Start. They met every
I know who he is. It just took a second. Yeah. John. I don't call my last name, so it just all of a sudden clicked. I know exactly who it is.
Yeah. Papa Smurf, right? He's got the
almost like a Santa Claus. Yeah, and he always kind of sits in the back because I think the music is kind of loud for them. Yeah. So, yep.
Exactly. Two of our, I would say, two of our best friends. They're just wonderful, wonderful people. But John was teaching at this Fresh Start. I walk in, I'm like, who is he? What does he know? He knows nothing. His story was identical to mine. We became fast friends. Anyway, I became involved in that. And so I was the small group leader. And our lawyer told Lynn, I want you to be in Doug's group. Not sure why he said that, but he wanted her to be in there. And this is... people can see me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Mm-hmm. All right, this was Lynn. So, if body language spoke, her body language was saying, you. She was not happy because she went through a deal where her husband left her almost bankrupt. It was bad. And so she was not happy, and that she was in my group with that body language screaming. And so that's right. And we, for that day, we found out we had a mutual acquaintance, not acquaintance for me. My aunt went to that church that she went to. She went to Twin Oaks. And so we became friends because of my aunt. And I dated her for once in a while. I would date her, and I think, she's got 3 kids. Do I want to take on 3 more? No. And I'd break up with her. She called it the couch talk, where I'd put my hand around her and she'd go, I know it's coming. And that was the first one. And then the second one, maybe, no. Now, I'll tell you this. We never introduced our kids to that relationship. And that was advice from Fresh Start, wise advice, because your kids have already been hurt, right? You don't want to get them loving somebody that you end up breaking up with. So we took that advice. We did not do that. Third time I called her and broke up with her again. Yeah, it was bad.
You broke up with her 3 times?
Yeah, I know. Okay. Go ahead, judge me.
I just wanted everybody to know 3 times so far.
Hey, it gets much worse, Scott.
At least it's over the shoulder. No. It's a little lax.
No. Okay. The third time was much worse.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, can you see red? Anyway, so the third time, I wrote her a letter, and it was dated Christmas Day. And I have that letter in that phone. I found it. She had it in her little, keepsake box. Why? I don't know. And in that letter, I said to her, Lynn, you're a wonderful, godly woman. God has someone for you. It's just not me. Oh, so pompous, And she kept the letter. So I just was so afraid of taking on 3. And now the whole time I'm thinking, I wasn't thinking, Doug, you have a woman in front of you who loves Christ, is not afraid of your 5. Who do you think is out there like her? Who's out there? And so that would play on my mind. And all I can say is, it came to a time, and I would say this was probably 90. Let's see, I asked her to marry me in 96, probably 95, late 95. I was on my bed and I felt the oppression of loneliness, which has helped me as an elder of a church. When I see people who've lost their spouse, I know I sense the feeling of loneliness. It doesn't matter that I had 5 kids, that I have lots of friends. I didn't have the companionship, and I felt utterly alone. And that was oppressive one night. And I just said, Lord, I am so lonely. And then, what's that movie, the Minion movie? Light the bulb, light the bulb. Yeah, you idiot. You've got a girl you've broken up with 3 times. I thought, Lord, I don't know. Should I call her again? She's just going to hang up. So I called her again. And I said, hey, Lynn, Doug? Yeah, listen, I was just wondering if maybe you wanted to, I don't know, catch a movie or something. And she says, okay. I'm shocked. I thought the next thing I'd hear was a phone hang up. She says, okay. I said, really? Now, what happened on that bed that night when I was feeling that oppression was I realized I was living my life by fear. I was afraid. And I came to the conclusion I can't do that anymore. I can't live my life by fear. And so something changed in my heart and my mind. And Lynn knew it when I knocked on the door, and we ended up not going to a movie, but we had a little picnic in her living room. Yeah. And when I left, now remember, I dated her 3 times prior to this, and never once kissed her, not once, because I told her that if that ever happens, it means something. It's not just, and I kissed her on the way out the door, and her look was like, I said, it's okay. I mean, she called me the next day and she said, did you regret kissing me? And I said, no, I didn't. Oh, so she knew something changed, something flipped in me, and I started to pursue her for marriage. So I ended up asking her to marry me on November, on Thanksgiving. I asked her to marry me on Thanksgiving Day, 1996. And she said, just a minute. I'm on my knees with the ring, right? And she goes back to her bedroom and brings out that letter. Should I marry a false prophet? I said, very funny. Put the letter down. Yes or no? She goes, yes. And we promised our children that they would, if we moved toward marriage, and we knew we were moving toward, that no one else would know before them. And so we went to Thanksgiving service at Twin Oaks that day and couldn't tell anybody. Lynn had to take the ring off, and until that night, we had all our kids together, and we told them we're going to get married. And they showed great excitement. We know later that they weren't, that one of them particularly was not very excited, because this is kind of the nail in the coffin of the potential of his mom and dad getting together, right? So, yeah, when we actually did get married, he told us much later that he was sitting in the pew going, when they asked, would you take this man to be your husband? He was going, Mom, just say no. Mom, please just say no, say no, say no. And she didn't say no. And we have a very, very warm and loving relationship today. And he's been coming to church with his kids. So, yeah, all good. Yeah, does that answer that question?
I loved it. That was great.
It's a fun story. Yeah, there's much more to it, but Lynn says it with a lot more relish. She was on the receiving end of those rejections. And but I am a very grateful man. I didn't expect to find a woman who would not only take on my 5, but also one who's handicapped. And that's a whole nother aspect to our relationship. Lynn spent a lot of one-on-one time with Jesse and got him to open up in ways I never could. We all just got frustrated trying to understand him because he can't speak very clearly. And she would really work hard to try to understand him. And then he became kind of a chatterbox. And now they have this love-hate relationship where she's always teasing him. If you ever see her in church, she'll turn to Jesse and go, "Shh, be quiet." Now, he's not said a word, right? And he'll hit her, and I'm like, not here, not now. They have
awesome.
this teasing relationship. Yeah.
No, that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
So,
I love it.
I think that's a great place to land for the day. Unless you got something, do you got anything else you want to talk about?
Blended families is a whole nother story, and that's something that probably ought to be talked about at some point in the future.
I think so. I plan on having you back, Doug.
I will tell you this, Josh, when people have, and Jerry has sent people to me who are thinking about blending a family, when he says, when they get with us, they say, well, what's your advice? I said, our biggest piece of advice, really? You ready for it? Yeah. Lower your expectations. I mean, if they're here, put them on the ground. This is going to be hard work, and you have to be ready for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
any other questions? Yeah.
I can't think of any right now.
all right. Well,
Yeah. I'll show you the letter
that's
I
awesome.
wrote after this. I don't want people to see this. I want you guys to see it.
No, it's all good.
I can't believe it. Three breakups.
3 breakups, and the last one with a letter on Christmas Day.
That's
That's
Low. That's, she said,
but it turned out all right now.
oh yeah, she
So-
said, "You coward." Yes, yes, indeed.
That's awesome.
I fully embrace that.
Well, thanks again for being here, Doug. We really appreciate having you. Great
having me.
conversation, and
It's been fun.
yeah, this is good.
yeah,
Runs in your blood, right? Talking to him.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
kind of. Yeah.
well,
didn't-
hopefully people are encouraged, A, in knowing Christ, and B, if there's somebody who's going through these situations, maybe they can draw some out. And some of the things I took from your conversation was, number one, you got to be in God's Word, plugged into a good Bible-believing church,
Critical.
and have a good support system around, and that's the church too, like when you were saying, hey, I'd show up and the kids weren't, having other ladies grab them and take care of them. I appreciate those every Wednesday that breathe into my kids' lives at youth group more than they'll ever know.
Right.
So, because there's really nothing more important as a dad than seeing your kids grow in the Lord and know the Lord.
And you're living that, Josh, because you're in the youth group, right? You're helping in the youth group. You've been doing that for years. I'll say this too. Jason Allagood was our youth pastor way back then, and he was really instrumental in Josh's development and eventually going to Moody and then on to Southern. So yeah, just another plug for a guy that I love dearly.
We like Jason.
Yeah.
He's good. Good guy.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that said, thanks again for checking out Triple Play and another episode. And don't forget to
Like and subscribe and comment and share and like and subscribe.
all that. I love it. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, guys.